My dear friends and family of the Great Park Synagogue, we're about to enter into a Shabbat, which is also Rosh Chodesh. It's a brand new Hebrew month, the month of Iyar. The month of Iyar is associated specifically with healing. It's an acronym, Aleph Yud Yud Resh, which stands for Ani Hashem Rofe'echa. I am God, your healer. May Hashem bring healing to all of those throughout the world who require healing. And may we enter into a Shabbat and into a brand new month with newfound energy and strength and positivity. We began this week and we had a report back from the Kaplan Institute about the South African Jewish community, and some of the key elements were the fact that we have been diminished as a community. We are smaller in size, but at the same time it identified the resilience and the strength of our South African Jewish community and our ability to bat way above our strength and our size. We are such a determined community to make good and to ensure that all of the structures of our community will be sound and will be strong, notwithstanding our present specific challenges in dealing with the pandemic. And we ended this week last night with the President speaking about the future of our way forward for South Africa, and the fact that we are still at a very high level of lockdown and ensuring the safety and security of the inhabitants of South Africa. And although we are troubled and we are affected and it is impacting largely on our lives and on the lives of so many in the Jewish community and in South Africa, we are at the same time cognizant of the fact that this is a requirement in order to preserve life. And this is a time in which we have to recognize that that is the most important element of our decision making, and that is to look after one another and to preserve life. So we are in fact proud that South Africa has made the decisions it has taken in order to ensure the preservation of life. I want to share a few thoughts about this Shabbat's reading, which actually has a number of questions about it, but it actually deals about the lockdown. It deals with the fact that people were sent into quarantine. And I want to preface the remarks I'm going to make with a story that you've probably heard from me at Shul, and if you have, bear with me, and if you haven't, so please enjoy a story about the city of Chelm. You know that the city of Chelm was known for its idiosyncrasies and many of the strange behaviors of human beings, and our individual strange behaviors were highlighted by the stories we tell about Chelm. And the story is told about once upon a time there was a shamash who was a faithful worker in the synagogue, a beadle, and he did everything that had to be done, and everyone was happy with him. He did all that was required of him, except one particular Friday when they made all the deliveries at times when such things happened for shuls, for the kiddush that was to happen. Nobody was around, and all the people who would normally sign for the delivery were not present. And so they turned to the Shamash of Chelm, and they said, "Will you sign for the delivery?" And he said, "I would love to help and assist, but unfortunately I don't know how to sign my name." And they said, "What? We have a shamash who doesn't know how to sign his name? That is an insult to the entire community. We didn't know this deficiency that you have, and we therefore summarily dismiss you. You are no longer the shamash at Chelm." And now he was absolutely shaken up. He didn't know how to support his family. And so he went out and he borrowed some money and he began to sell items on the corner, and he actually had an incredible aptitude for business. And in a short amount of time, he actually built up a clientele, and then he found somebody to work for him on the next corner, and eventually he diversified, and to cut the long story short, he became a very successful business person. And eventually he started up branches in the next city and in the next province, and then he became an international trader. And to cut this very long story short, the Shamash of Chelm became a multi-billionaire. And he had people, assistants and helpers and people working around him. And at one particular board meeting of all the national, international consortium of companies in which he had to make decisions and was signing on a contract, they passed the paper by him, and all of his assistants and helpers were not there for that moment. And for the second time in his life, he had to admit the fact that he didn't know how to sign his name. "What?" they said round the table. "You don't know how to sign your name? We cannot believe that you are the famous, most important business person. You don't know how to sign your name. Can you imagine what you could have been if you had only been able to sign your name?" And he said, "Yes, I would have been the shamash in Chelm. And it's a story that tells us about loss and about a debilitation that takes place in a person's life, and how sometimes the worst times are the possibilities for the best of times. And the general theme of this Shabbat talks about illness. It talks about a disease that we call leprosy, but it wasn't our regular leprosy. It was a disease that came about for spiritual deficiency, particularly when people spoke Lashon Hara negatively about another human being. And when we spoke in a way that was not kind about somebody else, our assessment was done by a Kohen rather than a doctor. And he looked at the physical ailments that the person had and said to him or her, you need to be quarantined, you have to go into lockdown. And they sent them outside of the camp for a period of 7 days, and sometimes the week was extended to another 7 days. But the person had to be alone and isolated in order, as we are taught, to be able to understand that speaking negatively about somebody else causes enmity. It causes that person to be isolated in whatever way. One cause a breakdown between husband and wife, between one person and their neighbor, and therefore the person has to experience that kind of solitude and being alone in order to work through what took place and to fix what is happening in that person's life. But what is strange about this Shabbat is that although it deals mainly with illness and talks about disease and how this disease was assessed and how we resolved the problem with the disease, it's actually called Tazria, one of the two portions, Tazria and Matzorah. Tazria means when a woman will give birth, and that's because the very opening verses talk about birth and the child being born into the world and being brought to the bris. So it talks about the most wonderful brand new beginning of life. So why would we call a whole section that talks about illness and disease the infirmary? Why would we call it the portion that deals with the maternity? Tazria means to give forth seed and to have a child, to bring life into the world. Why would we call something that talks about illness and loss something by a name that refers to and relates to birth and beginnings and opportunity? And there's a very interesting midrash that tells us that not only did this disease take hold of a person's flesh and their skin, but it also affected the person's clothing and even the person's home. And there's a strange midrash that when it did take hold of their home, so there was the requirement to break down that piece of the wall that had been influenced, that had been affected by the disease. And the midrash tells us that the Canaanites who lived in Israel prior to our arrival had hidden the wealth that they had. They'd cemented it into the walls of their homes. So in actual fact, when there was a situation that somebody had to break down the wall of their home, they actually discovered hidden treasures they didn't know about. They were actually living in the home for many years, and they didn't know that right there in the wall were these pieces of gold and silver and jewelry. So the Midrash tells us that in actual fact, the process of breaking down the wall was a means by which they discovered untold wealth that they would never have known about had they not been through the process. And all of this is indicative and so filled with meaning. We go into isolation because we have to resolve a problem. We have to understand when things have gone wrong in the world. But there's an opportunity to discover wealth. There's an opportunity to look at ourselves and to say, how could we live better? How can we lift the way we talk to one another? How can we raise the bar when it comes to interpersonal relationships and caring for each other? And so it is precisely the portion that talks about this illness and this disease that debilitated us to such an extent. It is called the portion of Tazria, when a person gives birth, when a person brings something new into the world, when we start anew and afresh and we look at things completely differently and discover a wealth that we would never have known about had we not been through the problem in the first place. We all have an element of the Shamash of Chelm inside of ourselves. Somebody who loses a job, God forbid, and goes through a process of saying, why is all of this happening in my life? And possibly the reinvention of oneself and the reinvention of one's family and the relationships in one's family, and looking at all that we have and seeing it as an opportunity to start something brand new and anew and fresh, and looking at life with all new possibilities that we can incorporate in it. We had a bar mitzvah this week, and we wish a special mazel tov to the Gruzen family. And Ethan Gruzen sang the portion which he had prepared for over a year, and he sang it magnificently for friends and for family scattered around the world in a Zoom bar mitzvah celebration. One of the things that was said to the Bar Mitzvah boy is that he'll remember forever that his Bar Mitzvah took place in a different way. But may he always remember it for the fact that it took place at a time that people were practicing social distancing, not because of enmity and not because of a negativity that exists between human beings, but because of love and because of commitment to life and because of care and concern. And that is the context of all that is happening in us, to rediscover and to re-find the bonds and the strands and the rope that holds together humanity. May all of us see in even the most difficult moments and the most difficult situations the opportunities for new birth, for new beginnings, for new opportunities to rebuild. May that happen in our shuls, may that happen in our schools, which we still have to find out exactly how our schools are going to open up. May it happen in businesses, may it happen at work, may it happen in the health and the well-being of every single one of our loved ones in our families, our community at Great Park, the Jewish community in South Africa and around the world, and the world at large. May we emerge from these troubled times having grown and developed into a whole new strength that we never knew we had. Have a good Shabbos and have a good Chodesh. Thanks for listening.